Folks, this is the right video to learn how to properly prep out a standing rib roast. And also, I'm going to show you how to cook it so you get a nice light pink in the middle and that it comes out beautiful and juicy and delicious. Howdy folks, welcome to Texas Cooking Today. This is one of my tutorial videos. On this one we get into the methods, the techniques, the history of the recipe, and I try to leave nothing out. Now if you're just needing the recipe and you don't need all the rest, that's the previous episode. But this one, you found one of my tutorials. So folks, let's get in the kitchen and I'm going to show you everything you need to know about this recipe. Come on. Today I'm going to be prepping out and cooking up a rib roast. I want to teach you everything there is to know about the rights and wrongs and the ins and outs and the ups and downs and all of that of cooking a rib roast. We're going to discuss different methods of actually cooking it. I'm going to show you different ways of prepping it out, and I'm going to show you some neat things that are going to make serving this roast a little bit easier. So guys, this is how to prep a rib roast and, well, how to cook a rib roast. Let's get into this. Come on. I like to use gloves when I'm handling my meat. It's just good practice because you don't have to worry about spreading anything to the meat, or even more important, spreading any of the juices of the meat elsewhere through your kitchen, and cleanup gets a lot easier just by pulling these off. So what we have here is a smallish rib roast. A big one of these is almost the length of this board, and they encompass a total of 7 beef ribs. Now, so you will know what this is, it's the exact same cut as a ribeye steak. It is the same piece of meat. This is the piece they cut the ribeyes from. All right, so A, excellent cut. B, a lot of fat to the cut, and that's one of the reasons there's so much flavor. This is along the back of the cow next to the spine, the upper part of the ribs. If you take the rack of ribs off of this, you essentially have the equivalent of baby back ribs of a beef. You know, so the lower rack of ribs extends down from this, and this is just the very upper part of it. This was already partially cut down, so I can only show you so much and teach you so much on this. But the first thing I want to show you, let me reach up here and get some paper towel. I wanted to show you, first of all, see, my ribs are partially cut free. When you get one of these, if you have silver skin on the back of this, you ought to go ahead and pull that silver skin off. Now what I'm doing is I'm using my paper towel to grab the corner, and that's what I just did. You see how I pulled it up? So I'm going to take that corner and I'm going to finish pulling this off. So what I've done here, and why is this important? This is important because if I want to use these ribs, that's some nasty stuff, folks, and I don't want it in my ribs, all right? So whether you're doing a small one like this or a full rack, do that so you can have some usable ribs later on. Now when you're going to trim up one of these roasts, or to cut the chine free, and the chine is, that's a terminology for the rack of ribs. So we're going to cut the rack of ribs free from the meat itself. Now the reason I do this, guys, is it honestly makes serving so much easier. You don't have to deal with that rib being in your way after it's cooked. When we're going to cut one of these free, and like I said, this one's already cut free, but it's still complete, so I get to show you this. You take your knife, pull that rib towards it with it facing me, and I'll take my knife and run it down the back side of the ribs, okay? And I want to run the knife along the rib itself and run it down, working it a bit at a time, and you can pull this away from the meat as you do that, and just work yourself down and down until you're at the bottom. And then once you're at the bottom, if you wish to remove that chine, you can. And folks, me, I like to, okay, because I'm going to use these as a rack of beef ribs, and I'm going to have that cooked up separate later on. It's going to get roasted with this, yes, but I also want to cook it up separate. Now sometimes, depending on your rib roast, you can have right where the top of those ribs were a huge band of fat. Okay, this one is it's not obnoxious about it. It's pulled free here, and it's only about 3/4 of an inch thick. If you wish to trim some of that down, trust me, all of that fat cannot render through the meat. Okay, you only need a band of about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch of fat at the most. So if you want to reduce some of this, so you get rid of some of that nasty, kind of a disgusting thick band of fat after it's cooked, it's not really pleasant to look at. That's what I'm going to do, is I'm just going to knock that down a little bit. There we go. I'm getting to the meat a little, so I want to stop. Okay, excess fat removed. All of the rest of the fat on top and within, folks, I'm keeping every bit of it. That's all flavor. And by the way, if you want, you don't have to throw away fat trimmings. These can actually be put in a pan, heated slowly, and you can render out the tallow and use that the same way you would lard. Okay, it's a wonderful way of using fat. So I have the rib removed from my rib roast. Okay, whoops, let's turn this the right way. Okay, now it's all hooked up. I just need to take this and retie it so it's usable, and that will be great. Now this piece right here, if I want, I can tuck it under, just leave it up here like so. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to shape it just like that, just the way it was originally. I have 2 pieces of string, and this is as simple as a couple of knots. Now when you have only a 2 rib, you can tie it this way if you wish, or you can still tie it to the traditional way, which is normally in between the ribs. Okay, in this case we're just going to go over the ribs. So as you see, prepping one of these things out is not that hard. You now know to remove the silver skin so that you can have usable ribs later on. Always a good thing to do. We cut the chine free from the meat, so later when I go to carving this, I can just cut these strings, remove those ribs, set the meat down on my cutting board, and go to carving. It works so very well. So next, I think we need to have a little discussion on rights and wrongs of cooking this. What's the right way to do it, and how to get it so you have a beautiful pink interior, but also with a gorgeous deep brown seared exterior. There's a couple of different ways, and we're going to discuss all of it. Now folks, there are lots of different ways of cooking up a rib roast. One of the popular ones these days is heat your oven up really, really hot, usually 500 to 550 degrees, depending on who you're listening to, and put your roast in there for a certain predetermined number of minutes at that high temperature, and then just shut the oven down and leave the roast in there for 2 hours. All right, I've seen that done multiple different times, and okay, there's some stuff about that that really bothers me. I'm sure it works for some people. However, let's take into account the fact that all ranges and ovens are built different one from the other. A good example of this is electric ovens generally don't have a lot of venting surface because they're not venting. They're only heating the air inside and trying to hold it in as well as they can. So an oven like an electric oven, this technique would probably work very well on. However, if you have a gas oven, you're probably going to be disappointed. Gas ovens can cool down in 45 minutes to an hour, and I mean all the way down. So that leaves your meat sitting there uncooked in a oven that's not hot at all, and suddenly the meat's keeping the oven hot rather than the other way around. So you end up with an undercooked piece of meat that's properly seared. That's not cool. So what's better, in my opinion, and is to have a controlled temperature. Now, decades back, in fact, I know this technique goes back at least 100 years. Long time ago, it was determined to sear the meat. Now that's good for locking in juices and keeping it nice, and it gives it a beautiful color and a nice flavor, but also nice and juicy, and that's the important part. And then we bring the temperature down on that piece of meat and cook it at 325. Now, this temperature wasn't just pulled out of thin air. It was over decades, actually centuries, of testing and trial and error. What is it like when it's cooked at 300? What's it like when it's cooked at 275? What's it like when it's cooked at 350? Okay, and there's different problems. 350 gives you a little bit overdoneness. 300 gives you a little underdoneness. And 325 seems to work the best for the shape and size and the method of cooking. Now, when it comes to a prime cut like this, we're not cooking it so it's gray all the way through. We're cooking it so it's pink in the middle. We want it tender and soft and pink. That's the reason we choose such a tender piece of meat. This doesn't necessarily work for something like chuck. I wouldn't do it with that. But for a nice rib cut like this, yeah, it works great. So then it boils down to, what searing method do we use? There's two different basic searing methods that are used for this kind of cooking. Searing method number 1, and it's most commonly done in the home. Jack up the temperature in the oven to your higher temperature. For most electric ovens, that's around 500. For most gas ovens, that's around 525 to 550. And that's your home ranges, not commercial ranges. Now, when we raise that temperature up like that, what it does is it allows the high heat to sear the outside of the meat. It gives it that crust that seals it. And whether you do it in the oven at 500 or 550 degrees, or whether you do it on a hot pan, it's the same exact effect either way. So you can either pan sear in the pan and then put that pan down in the oven, or you can pan sear in the oven itself. Now, I'm going to do it in the pan, and this is important. The reason I want to teach you this, sometimes we're cooking many different things in the oven, and a lot of things can cook at 325 degrees, but not much can survive that 500 or 550 degrees. So if you have a casserole in there at the same time you want to cook up your meat, you're going to end up ruining your casserole. Okay, this technique allows you to cook other things at the same time, and it all comes out wonderful. Also, if you're in a restaurant, well, you don't always have the advantage of jacking up the temperature on the oven and pulling it back down, because in a restaurant, that oven is serving many purposes simultaneously. And at the same time, some restaurants may have an item called a salamander, which is like a super hot broiler. They can sear it off in that. Often though, it's just done in the pan and then dropped up in the oven, and it seems to work great that way. So that's the technique I'm going to show you. We're going to do a pan sear now. I have my oven already preheated. It's at 325 degrees. The cook time after I sear it is going to be about 20 minutes per pound. The sear time, well, we're looking at about 5 minutes of searing per pound. Okay, and so I've got almost 5 pounds here. It's 4.77 pounds. So that would be, what, about 20 to 25 minutes in the sear time on top. Hey, what do you know? It's the same time in the oven. Okay? Easy. Okay, let's get after this. Come on. Folks, I have my pan heating up here. And this is, when we're searing this, you don't have to worry about overcooking that meat. That's a huge chunk of meat. Something we need to do before searing is to go ahead and season our meat. And that's just going to be a matter of salt and pepper. So while my pan is heating, I'm going to season up my meat. And you can use too much seasoning, all right? Don't be afraid to really lay it on, okay? After all, it's a big chunk of meat. It's not going to hurt it. All right, folks, you see how that's sizzling off pretty quick? It's getting there, but it's not quite hot enough to sear meat really well. And especially a big piece of meat, you need the pan fiery hot. The pan needs to be able to take water droplets and just have them beat up and float around in there, kind of like they're skating around, but not to sizzle off. It needs to be that hot, okay? So get it really hot. We'll use the water technique again in a moment to test its temperature. Okay, let's test that temperature. Now looky there. You see how the water that we put in there doesn't sizzle off? It just kind of beads up. Okay? That's the Leidenfrost effect, guys. Scientist named Leidenfrost learned that a pan that's hot enough will develop a vapor barrier in between the water droplet and the pan that allows it to just not really sizzle off. So what we want to do is get our meat in there. Now I'm just going to put in a little oil. Doesn't have to be much oil. And all that is to promote a good release. In a moment it'll render enough of its own fat that that won't matter. Okay, from here it's a matter of getting it deep brown all the way around, and that's going to be 4 to 5 minutes per side. Okay, so let's set us a timer. Our timer has gone off. Just need to look at this meat. It's going to be nicely seared. Look at that. And now I have a lot more oil in my pan since the fats have rendered on this. Now something else I want to mention, we have the chine tied on to the meat. Number one, that is protecting the bottom part of the meat where there's nothing really protecting it. Up here you have the fat cap that kind of adds fat and renders down and protects the meat inside. But nothing down here, okay, once that bone is cut free. So we tie the bone back on, and then when I'm cooking this, I stand it on the bone, and that allows some air and heat to get up underneath there, and it cooks it a little more evenly. So that gives you your cooking rack that you cook on top of the bone itself. After this is seared off all the way around, folks, I'm putting the whole pan down in the oven. This exact pan goes in the oven, the same one I seared it in. So it's all kind of done in one thing. I could have done this in a Dutch oven or in many other different ways, but this is the way I'm going to show you on this one today. So it's cooking up beautifully. I'm working off the ends now, and as soon as those are done, I'm going to be putting the excess fat in this separate bowl here. And this is important. It's going to be rendering out a lot of fat because this type of cut has a lot of fat in it. Even if you get one that's lean, they're very fatty. Okay, so we don't need all of that in that pan. So before it goes in the oven, I'll have something to pour it off into. Don't worry, we're not going to get rid of anything good. There we go. My preheated. There we go. That's down in the oven now. Folks, cooking time on this. I did my math on it. All right, I had a roast that was 4.77 pounds. It needs to cook at 20 minutes per pound. Well, that gives me about a 95-minute cook time once I do the math. And that's simple enough. You simply multiply the weight, that 4.77 times the time you're cooking, times 20, and boom, that's when you get that number, 95. 95 minutes, but I'm going to check it sooner. Why? Like I mentioned earlier, we have a smaller size roast here. This is only a 2-rib roast. It's going to heat up faster than a 4-rib roast would do. So if a 4-rib roast normally cooks at 20 minutes per pound, for medium, shouldn't this be a little bit shorter? Yeah, it sure will. So I've got to reduce my cook time. I'm going to check this thing in 75 minutes. All right. This has been 75 minutes now. Remember when I told you that sometimes we might want to cut back on our time just a little bit. If I wanted this medium rare, it's perfect right where it is right now, okay? And it's at 123 degrees. So I'm going to give it a few more minutes because I want it to be right at 140. So back in it goes. There we go, folks. 138, 139.1. Yeah, we're there. This just needs time to rest, okay? So I'm going to tint it with some foil, let it rest. And folks, if you want to make something special, well, we'll talk about what to do with what's in that pan. There we go. I'm going to put some foil over this. It doesn't have to be perfect, okay? Now folks, something I want to mention. If you want a special sauce, the drippings in this pan are magnificent for it. And what I would do if I wanted to make a sauce for this, which I'm not going to be doing, but if I wanted to, I would take either red or white wine. I would pour it right down into that pan after removing the roast, of course. And then, after bringing that wine up to a boil and deglazing the pan with it, I would then whisk in butter. And that would, if it was red wine, give me what's called a beurre rouge. And if it was a white wine, it would be called a beurre blanc. Those are French terms for certain types of sauces. And these are the sauces that are made for beef. They are delicious, guys. So if, like I said, if you want something neat and special, give that a try. This needs some more time, okay? It's been roasting. It's a beautiful roast, but we have temperatures in this roast that are uneven. The outer edges of the roast are very hot. The inner part of the roast is not quite hot enough, and those temperatures are going to stabilize. The middle will come up in temperature a little bit to about 145, which gives me a nice medium, and then the outside is going to cool a little bit and become ready to slice. If I slice that too soon, well, it's not going to be as good because it will weep its juices a lot more. All right, this has had plenty of rest time now. It's had about, almost 25 minutes. So what I want to do, I want to cut these strings that I had tied it with. And we will gently pull those back. Pull that out from underneath. I'm going to take my meat and lift it off of the chine and set it to the side. There we go. Now these little tiny rack of ribs I have, I'm going to save those. I will be using them. There's a lot of ways you can do those, folks. You could put them wrapped up in foil back in your oven, let them slow cook until they become perfect. And when they're sticking out, the bones are sticking out from the meat, you've cooked them long enough. But remember, ribs take a long cook. So let me turn this. There we go. I just need to steady this. Cut just that outer off. We have inside here this beautiful medium cut. Now if you're thinking I'm cutting that too thin, well folks, believe it or not, that's just one of the ways I like my roast beef. And I think it's wonderful like that. But look at that. Isn't that gorgeous? A little darker out here, yes of course. However, gorgeous meat all the way through. Got a nice medium the way I like it. And if I wanted that to be a medium rare, I could have had pink all the way to that outer edge. Oh, it's so good either way. It's a delicious roast. Guys, it's so juicy. Man. When you cook a roast the right way, you get that deep beef flavor, you get the wonderful pink, and that gives you that very special steak-like flavor that's just banging good. On a roast like this, it gives you the best of all of those worlds. The flavor of this steak, that sear, at the same time, you get a lot more of that beautiful red center. And that's the reason we do it this way. Folks, thank you very much for watching. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe if you haven't done so already. I would appreciate it if you would share this video, let people know about it, and let people know about Texas cooking today. Folks, you have a good day, and thank you for watching. Bye-bye. Well, there it was, folks. One of my tutorials, and I would like to say thank you so very much for watching. If you would, please click the subscribe button If you use the comments box, you can be rest assured I do read those, okay? If you have a suggestion, a comment, or if you have a request, put it down in there. You'll be surprised how often I fulfill requests. Folks, thank you for watching. Please share this video, and also please have a good day. Bye-bye.